Hello, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is my new channel, After the Age of Fire. This is the second episode. The first episode was introducing myself and introducing the main themes of After the Age of Fire, what it'll be about. And now I want to talk in the second episode a little bit about the overall direction that we'll take. This it's almost like telling a story. I'll be telling a story over many episodes or trying to develop a theme over many episodes. And I just want to give you an idea that there's a plot line here and that there's a plan. Um, Now, I'll concentrate. Actually, I have three main sections to this storyline, and I'll talk about them each in turn. But right now, after I mention what the three are, I'm going to explain what the first one is in more detail and leave the second one and the third section for later. Okay. The first overall, I think of this as talking about our past, our present, and our future. Um, those are the three sections, but I need to explain a little bit more what I mean by talking about past, present, and future. Um, in our past, I'll be talking about the last 250 years, the exponential growth that we've been experiencing. I mean, by saying exponential growth, sorry to lay such a big phrase on you. What I really mean is that for the last 250 years, we've been multiplying our consumption of just about anything you can think of by about two every 21, 22 years. And I'll go into some more detail about that, but that's the context of the last 250 years. Um, it's unlike anything else that the human race has ever done. Clearly, there's been no other time in history or before we began recording history when the human race was able to multiply our consumption by two so frequently and so many times. By now, over the last 250 years, we've multiplied our consumption of just about everything by 1,000. And if you look at the consumption per person, our total consumption per person is perhaps 100 times what it was 250 years ago in around 1775 or so. Um, it's been really a remarkable time. Um, and by now, it's so far, the beginning of this is so far past that at least in the rich countries, there's no memory of what life was like before that. We do have books to read. We can sort of look at do archaeology and look at records and imagine what life was like before that. But there's really very little memory in our families or anything that's passed on from generation to generation about what life was like before we started managing to multiply by two. Um, really, a lot of forgetting has gone on. So that's the context, and by now we're using a large fraction of the energy that the that the planet has on hand. If you look at how much energy is consumed by all the other living beings on this planet, all the trees and animals and fish, we aren't using half of it. We might be using a smaller fraction than that, and I'll get into that later. But it's not a small thing. It's not insignificant compared to what everything else uses. Um, so we've done remarkably well, and in terms of increasing our consumption over the last 250 years, and by now, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode, by now, if you look at the amount of calories that we use, each person, an average person spread across the planet, uses on average 46,000 calories that is not harvested directly from trees and plants, and another 15,000 or so that are harvested from trees and plants. The trees and plants are used for lumber, for fuel, for fodder for our animals, and they're used to feed us. The other 46,000 calories are used generally for burning. Um, and of those 46,000 calories, 5 or 6,000 come from things like wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, and the other 40,000 or so come from burning coal, oil, and gas. So almost all of the energy that we use, aside from food, fodder, and wood, almost all of that still comes from coal, oil, and gas, no matter how much you've heard about other things that people are doing. Okay. Um, so that's and but when I talk about in this first section devoted to the past, I'm not just concerned with talking about how much energy we're using and where we're getting that energy. I'm also concerned about, is it possible to continue using this amount of energy? Are there ways to continue providing this amount of energy, roughly 60,000 calories per person averaged across the planet, more for the United States citizens? They get more like 210,000 calories plus food, fodder, and wood per person, in some other rich countries too, but the average is around 46,000 plus 15,000. Is it possible to continue getting this energy on the long term? And I mean, long term, more than 100 years, more than 200 years. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe we could continue getting this amount or even double this amount for some time, but I'm talking about probably more than somewhere between 50 and 200 years from now. Will we still be able to continue going with this level of energy consumption per person? And so the first thing to discuss is, can we get this amount of energy, continue getting 40,000 calories per person per day from coal, oil, and gas? Or maybe could we even multiply that by 2, as we've been doing for the last 250 years, multiply it by 2 again? Um, are we going to continue multiplying coal, oil, and gas, or are we going to be able to stay at the same level, 40,000 or what? Okay, and this may seem a little bit incorrect uh, for some listeners, because, of course, we are all informed that using coal, oil, and gas puts the entire human race at peril and the entire planet in peril, and pretty soon, very soon now, the whole planet will be uninhabitable because of our burning things. Okay, uh, I'm uh, to me that's beside the point, because we seem pretty determined to continue consuming energy, um, and we haven't made the planet uninhabitable yet. Um, so as yet, the human race continues to multiply our energy use year on year, and that largely means burning more coal, oil, and gas. As a matter of fact, all the work that we've done on building wind turbines and solar panels still has not, or nuclear power plants, uh, still has done very little to provide for our increased energy consumption. Um, Almost all of our increasing energy consumption comes from increasing our consumption of coal, oil, and gas, and there's been really no sign yet that we have any real practical intention of stopping that. If you look at the numbers of what we're actually doing, we're just not slowing down really, much less reversing. And how long can this continue? So we say that we're about to meet a climate disaster, but despite talking about the climate disaster a lot, we continue to plan to increase our consumption. and we continue to actually do it, to actually increase. And so can coal, oil, and gas really do it for us if we're so set on increasing our consumption every generation? Um, and the reason why I another reason why I'm more focused on whether we can or not is because it has to do with the real world in front of us, and less about what we think about uh, what's moral or right. What are our real possibilities? When I talk about our real possibilities, what could actually be done? It's even if we decided we wanted to burn the planet down, and we thought the way to do it was to multiply our consumption of coal, oil, and gas by 10, um, could we do it? And as far as I can tell, and I'll discuss this in quite some detail, as far as I can tell, the answer is no. Um, so then the next question is, if we can't continue our pattern of multiplying our consumption every generation by multiplying coal, oil, and gas, uh, then what about building more wind turbines, more solar panels, and more nuclear power plants? And I'll discuss this from several different viewpoints, okay? And why there might be some difficulty with meeting even a consumption of 40,000 calories per person per day using wind, solar, and nuclear. So why it might be very difficult or impossible to substitute, to get rid of coal, oil, and gas and maintain the same lifestyle that we have today by using wind, solar, and nuclear. Um, I'll discuss that and take several viewpoints on that, develop it in several different directions. But the first answer I'm going to give to that, and I'll again be going into all sorts of details, and there's a lot more in the book than I'll be talking about in on these episodes. Um, but overall, the one answer is that no, it just costs too much. Um, you look at how much we spend to obtain 2,000 calories. Well, we aren't obtaining 2,000 calories per person per day from wind or from solar, but how much it would cost to just get that much, okay? And then you think, okay, well, how about providing 40,000 calories per person per day from wind or solar? Um, it's just more than we can afford, okay? And it's not like we're going to have more money to pay for it 30 years from now, because if we suppose our economy multiplies by 2 in the next 25 years, and so then we'll have twice as much resources supposedly if this were to happen, if our economy and our consumption were to multiply by 2 in the next 25 years, so we could build twice as much wind, solar, and nuclear because we'd have twice as much to spend, okay? But the problem is, of course, that we'd want to build twice as much wind, solar, and nuclear because we'd be consuming twice as much. So waiting for the economy to grow doesn't really get you anywhere. If the economy grows, you need more windmills, and they'll still cost, or more solar, and they'll still cost, or more nuclear, and it'll still have its cost. Nuclear, actually, among the three, will be the most difficult to get to the bottom of, and the cost of nuclear and whether we can provide for our energy uses with nuclear. Um, but that's a discussion for another episode, or maybe several other episodes. Um, I'm not saying that we shouldn't build wind, solar, nuclear. It's great. I mean, or it could be great. I mean, to build some uh, prudently and thoughtfully about what the actual benefits will be and the cost. Um, but I'm just saying, as far as I can tell, after reviewing all the numbers, all the statistics, and all the possibilities for the future, there's no likely way that their prices will ever come down to a point where we'd be able to provide even 40,000 calories per average person, much less multiply that by 2 after a generation and by 4 after another generation. So, coal, oil, and gas may not be able to give us those factors of 2, um, and I don't think wind, solar, or nuclear will be able to do it either. And by the way, you can think of any number of other sources of renewable energy that have been discussed in the press, and I'm not mentioning them because they don't seem to be serious competitors to wind, solar, and nuclear. But I'll discuss that someday. Um, so what's left? Well, leaving out wind, solar, nuclear, and all the other renewables, leaving out coal, oil, and gas, what else could multiply our energy consumption? The only other possible way of multiplying our energy consumption is is to harvest more from our plants. Um, so could we increase our yearly harvest from plants and from trees and crops that we grow, and so then I'll go into considerable detail about how plants do their harvesting. And at first you might think so, because actually our plants today they they harvest less than less than 1 out of 300 calories that arise from the sun. Most of the calories that arrive from the sun turn into heat, and only a little bit of it is stored as plant material. So you might look at that it's a very simple fact, and you might look at that fact and think, okay, well, if the plants are throwing out 299 out of 300 calories, surely we should be able to do better. And so first I'll discuss what are they doing with those other calories? When do they get thrown away, and why do they get thrown away? Um, then actually, it depends a little bit on the plant. Um, some plants do a factor of 2 better, do twice as good as other plants. But I'm just throwing out the 1 out of 300 because it's a nice one. It's a nice number. Um, but so it could be 1 out of 300. It could be one out of. Um, it's just a large number. Um, so could we make plants that do better? Is there some way we could help our ecosystems along so we could get more harvest from our fields and our forests? And so I'll be discussing where those calories go, um, and and what we could possibly do for the plants to help them. And again, uh, sadly, it seems like they're considering the challenges that our plants are trying to address. One of the biggest challenges is that they really are starving for materials from the atmosphere. They need to get something from the atmosphere in order to make more plant material in order to store energy, and that something is really hard to get. Um, and the plants make tremendous sacrifices. There are other things to think about. Plants have to cope with seasons. They have to cope with different kinds of soil, and um, we can't provide the entire planet with an ideal soil, and we can't put the entire planet under a hothouse. Um, so, and these are all things that plants are somehow able to do without, and So in the end, maybe we can do something for our plants, but it will be very hard to multiply their harvest for our portion of their harvest by a factor of two even. In fact, considering some of the things that we are doing to our cropland and to all of the world's land right now, it may require considerable effort just to maintain our harvest over the next 100 years. So I'll come at this in several different ways. Why it seems difficult that we could, over the long term, maintain a harvest of 40,000 calories or 46,000 calories plus the 15,000 from plants. In other words, a total of 60,000 in any combination. It seems very difficult that we could do that in any way, any combination of wind, solar, nuclear, plants, whatever you want to throw at it. It seems very difficult. So that's the first main section of this book, and if you'll notice, it seems to be mostly focused on energy. I talk about consumption in general. Sure, we've been multiplying our consumption of many resources, not just energy, just to make things simple, and also because there are lots of records of different kinds of energy usage. It's been studied a lot. I focus on energy, but overall, it may seem like an exercise in accounting. It's how much can we get? How much do we use? Do they balance? Is there any way that they could be balanced? The amount that we get, that we could be used, that compared to how much we use. Is there any way that it could be increased? Okay, and especially once if we were to not just stop being able to multiply coal and gas, but if someday we were to find that they were harder to get out of the ground, so we would have to have more people working to work underground, start sending, as we did in the past, armies of people underground living in unsafe conditions to get what we want. Once that starts happening for coal, oil, and gas, how long are we going to be able to maintain our current energy consumption, and what's the price going to be? Would be having 1 out of 10 families send their men underground. Is that the way we're going to do it, or what? So that's the first section of the book. The second section of the book will be discussing our present. Given that it looks like long term we aren't going to be able to, maybe short term we might be able to consume twice as much as we do today for another 50 years or another 100 years, or maybe we won't. That's the short term, okay, but right now, where are we today? Given that sooner or later we'll be back to 40,000 from coal and gas, or from 46,000 from some combination, plus 15,000 from plants. So sooner or later we'll be back down to 60,000 total, and then a little bit later we'll be below that. We'll have less than 60,000 per person per day, 60,000 calories. Sooner or later, where are we right now? Are we really still expanding? Are we really still at this time multiplying by 2 every 22 years or so? Do we have another factor of 2 to go? Maybe my children or your children will have a factor of 2 more, and then we'll meet our limit. Or are we already past our limit, and maybe we're keeping going just by burning more coal and gas than we can manage right now, or maybe we're not actually economically expanding. Maybe our economic expansion worldwide is ending right now, even though right now our coal, oil, and gas is still increasing some. There are other ways to talk about uh, quality of life, or about the amount of goods that people are using and the quality of those goods, and maybe that's decreasing. Um, uh, where do we stand right now? And that will involve, the first part was very easy in a way because we have the mathematical pattern is very simple. It's just multiplication, multiply every 22 years. That's called exponential growth. Okay, and we fit that very clearly. So you just need to talk about what is it, how long can we continue that. But in the second, where we are now, as exponential growth might be already ending, or maybe it really ended aside from the coal, oil, and gas, or maybe it's about to end 25 years from now, 50 years from now, all sorts of other patterns could happen. There's all sorts of other ways that things could go, and it could get very complicated, uh, and maybe it already is very complicated to understand the world situation and where we are right now. Um, so I'll take some time to try to talk about where the world stands right now, and how, what sort of patterns could it be following, and which ones does it seem like we are following right now, and are we already past our limit, um, uh, or do we have a bit more to go? Okay, and then the third section of the book will be about our future and about how to prepare for it. So, what will life be like? How much energy? First of all, how much energy could we expect to have in the long term? Suppose once we've burnt all the coal, oil, and gas that's easy to get, and where we get to the point where to get more means sending armies underground, and we're having to make interesting choices about that, or maybe the way to get energy is to build nuclear power plants, and we're having to make interesting choices about how many thousands of nuclear power plants we want to have located in each country, um, and about the risks that might come with those thousands of nuclear power plants, or tens of thousands, maybe. Right now, the amount of energy that we're consuming right now, if you wanted to provide for all, to get rid of the coal, oil, and gas, and provide for all of that with nuclear power plants, you'd need about 16,000 of them. Okay, so maybe we send our armies underground to do some more mining, or maybe we just build 10,000 nuclear power plants, or if we want to double our consumption, maybe we build 30,000 nuclear power plants. So, given that we're going to have to be making interesting choices about how much energy we really need, and what we're willing to do to get it, um, perhaps we'll be willing to do with less than the current amount. Maybe we'll be willing to do with not 60,000 per person, but maybe 30,000 per person. So maybe we'll be willing to accept, or find that we have to accept, 15,000 from our crops and our forests, and 15,000 from other sources, if that's what it's going to be like. Or maybe that's a little low, you think. Maybe we'll be able to stick somehow with 60,000 per person. At any rate, it's still a limit, which is a lot different than the last 250 years. And what is the world going to be like as we find ourselves living with limits on our energy consumption and our consumption of every other resource? Some people seem to think that this would be the end of the world. Some people seem to think that civilization will have collapsed, that the whole technological progress will be over, and it'll be a complete failure if we have to live with that. I'm inclined, and this is really the motivation of this book, is I think that there's a very good future ahead of us, even if we have to live with half as much energy as we have now. And I just want to discuss in this last third of the book what the world is going to be like with when we're living with limits instead of as it is today when we're not living with limits. How will that affect our travel? How will that affect our nations, our politics, our geopolitics? How will it affect our culture and our religion, our families? How about basic things like democracy or slavery? I'm not trying to hint in any way that I'm pro-slavery, but but there's all sorts of things. Languages, how many languages will we have, and how fluidly will they change, or will they be standardized as so many languages are today? Um, and I also want to discuss how you can prepare for this future. This future might be coming 30 years from now, or maybe it's starting to come, and maybe it will finally have fully arrived in 100 years or in 50 years. But how do you want to prepare yourself and your family for that? Do you want to have any of your bloodline remaining after this transition happens? Because many of us have started living in a way that will not adapt. And we bring up the few children that we have in ways that they are even less able to adapt than we are. I'm not talking about being able to adapt to the next version of iPhone. I'm talking about being able to adapt to a world that lives under constraints, where energy doesn't come for free and neither does food. It'll be a very interesting world. It'll be a beautiful world, but it won't be the one that we're living in now. Do you want your family line to make it through that transition into the new world? Or are you content to take your lumps? And if your grandchildren don't make it, or you just don't have grandchildren, maybe that's okay with you? Well, for me, it's not really okay. I want my grandchildren to have children. Okay? And I hope the same for many other families. So I want to talk about what the future will be and how we can prepare ourselves and our families for that future. And lastly, I want to talk about what kind of story we're in. There are many different accounts of the story that we're in. One of them is about some sort of story where somehow humanity hit on something, say 300 years ago, a way of living, a bunch of practices. I call them best practices, say technology, science, democracy, capitalism, or if you like socialism, or if you like communism, whatever they are, and we know hundreds of these best practices, the way that things should be done. And if we continue to follow these best practices, we have a bright and unlimited future that will only get better every generation until the end of time. That's one story. Another story is that we're coming to an apocalypse. And there are several other stories that one could make. And I'll review these and I'll tell you what kind of story I think we're in. What's the meaning of this story? How is it that this unique time, this very special and amazing time, in a way a very beautiful time and a very ugly time, also has happened to this human race the last 250 years? A time of amazing possibilities and amazing evil. And then that we would come to this point where it will end. What does this story mean? So I hope this gives you an idea of where this book is going overall. I expect that for the for quite a while, we'll be just talking about the first portion of the book, which I think of as our past, but is also an accounting of how much energy we can get versus how much energy we're using. How much can we get from coal, oil, and gas? How much can we get from wind, solar, and nuclear? How much can we get from our harvest? And what can we do about that? It'll be very scientifically oriented, this first section, but then will come the section about where do we stand now as we end the exponential growth, or are about to end it, or have already ended. And then the last section will be about the future and how to prepare for it, and what kind of story we're in. I want to say something. You might be a little confused about things that I say, like maybe our exponential growth has already ended, or maybe it's about to end, or maybe it has already ended. That may seem a little bit ambiguous to you. I'm not being ambiguous at all. Okay, the fact is that we live in a very complex world. 8 billion people and a lot more plants, animals, rocks, trees, and other weird things going on around us. And it can be very hard to sort out, for anybody to sort out. I'm not just saying for myself, but even for the whole human race as a whole to sort out the numbers and figure out exactly where we stand on a progress chart. And there are well-known problems with comparing one country's economy to another country's economy, or with figuring out how fast inflation is going and how much an economy is growing compared to inflation, and things like that. So I'll discuss that later, but throughout this book I'll try to be very careful to be clear about what one can be sure of and what one cannot be sure of, and what one would need to think about making judgments here. So should I judge to believe the official United States numbers about the rate of inflation? If I do, then say over the last 100 years, then I'll get one story of how fast not only the United States economy is growing, but the entire world's economy is growing, because one typically uses the United States inflation rate as a sort of a measure of inflation around the world. So fine, compare the 2025 US dollar to the 1950 US dollar, because one believes that a dollar has some equivalent in another country's currency, and one believes that one can keep track of these equivalencies. Okay, but there are other ways of calculating inflation, and also exchange rates. And there's discussion, lots of discussion in the scientific literature and elsewhere about different ways one could do it, and one can come up with substantially different results. So I'm just trying to be, throughout this book, I will try to be honest. I'm not going to smooth things over or paper things over or make things simpler than they are. We live in a real world, and that's actually going to be the beginning of this book. The actual first words that I will write, that I've written in this book, and the first thing I'm going to say in the next episode will be about paying attention to reality as it is, not something that we imagine or some model or some ideal. Anyway, so now you have the overall structure of the book. You'll probably be still finding surprises about things that I include in one place or another, and you'll be finding that there actually is more than one plot line, and that just today I've told you the one that organizes the chapters in the order that they come, and will organize the episodes in the order that they come, but there are other plot lines. Okay, so I hope you keep coming back, and more of you. But by the end of this episode, I hope you have an idea of the direction. Well, I'll talk with you next time. I hope to have an episode at least every week, maybe twice a week. Um, in the meantime, take care and keep coming back.